In 1970, Tom Oar was dragged unconscious by a bull for 2 minutes. But that wasn't his worst day. 45 years later, living deep in Montana's wilderness, something happened that no amount of toughness could fix. It involved his daughter, a desperate 80-mile drive, and a diagnosis that changed everything. The man who never asked for help suddenly needed machines to keep breathing. The truth about why he disappeared from TV is darker than anyone imagined. Tom Oar's story doesn't begin in the wilderness. It starts in Rockford, Illinois, on March 22, 1943. But even there, the Wild West ran through his blood. His father, Tom Oar, had performed in legendary Wild West shows that toured America between 1870 and 1920. These weren't just theater acts. They were the real deal, full of trick riding, sharpshooting, and rope stunts that gave small-town audiences a glimpse of a vanishing frontier life. While most American kids in the 1940s were being raised on modern comforts, Tom grew up in a home that still celebrated grit, horses, and raw independence. That kind of upbringing leaves a mark. Tom and his older brother Jack weren't raised indoors. They were raised outside, across fields and pastures, with freedom most kids only dream of. When they turned 7, their father began teaching them trick riding, not bicycles, but horses, and not just riding them, standing on them while galloping, jumping from them, hanging off them at full speed. It wasn't a game. It was real training, dangerous, disciplined, and totally addictive. They learned to treat risk like a normal part of life, and even more importantly, they learned to trust their instincts and respect the natural world. That wild spirit didn't fade with age. At just 15, Tom made a move that would terrify most parents. He quit school to chase a rodeo dream. No gradual plan, no safety net, just his bull rope, his rigging bag, and a thumb out on the highway. He hitchhiked across states, sleeping wherever he could, eating whatever he could afford, and throwing himself on top of animals that could kill him in seconds. This was the early 1960s. No phones, no credit cards, no help, just guts. And yet it worked, because Tom didn't just dream about the cowboy life, he lived it. Every brutal second. The wildest part? His mom drove him to the edge of town and dropped him off. No lecture, no crying, just quiet support from a woman who knew her son couldn't live a tame life. Tom later said, "She dropped me off with my bull rope and my rigging bag, and I hitchhiked to Ohio." That's not just a sentence, that's a way of life. It shows how deep the Wild West values ran in his family. Freedom, risk, and authenticity came before everything. She didn't try to change him. She helped him become exactly who he was. And who he became was a force in the rodeo world. In just a few years, Tom was competing with the best in the International Rodeo Association. Bull riding, bronc riding, bareback. He wasn't just entering contests, he was placing in the top 10. Again and again. He made the International Finals Rodeo 8 times. This wasn't luck. It was years of punishing work. He lived out of his truck, ate when he could, and rode injured more often than not. In the 1960s, rodeo was a brutal sport. Minimal prize money, almost no medical care, and animals that didn't care if you walked out of the arena or got carried. And yet, Tom pushed on, year after year, ride after ride. His dedication paid off in records that few could touch. He qualified for the first 8 International Finals rodeo events. For 15 straight years, he ranked among the top 15. In 1970, he finished 8th in the all-around. He rode saddle broncs for 10 seconds, 2 more than today's standard. He kept detailed records of every ride, every win, every injury, and the rides were non-stop. He often rode 5 animals in one night, 3 broncs, 2 bulls, sometimes twice in the same day. At just 16 years old, he was earning $1,500 in 3 months, more than his father made all summer. But every ride had a price. The human body can only take so much. Tom's technique of locking his hand to the bull rope gave him control, but made injuries worse. The constant pounding from 2,000-pound animals broke ribs, tore ligaments, and battered his brain in ways doctors wouldn't understand for decades. February 14, 1970 was supposed to be just another rodeo show, for Tom Oar. A Valentine's Day crowd, a familiar arena, and another wild ride. At 35, Tom was in his prime. Throughout the 1960s, he had been one of the top riders in the International Rodeo Association. Always in the finals, always a fan favorite. People came to see him risk it all, and that day, it felt like routine. Same gear, same prep, same rope. He slipped his finger into the bull rope like he had done hundreds of times before, but this time, it nearly killed him. The bull's name was Woolly Bugger, big, violent, known for chaos. As soon as the gate swung open, it exploded into motion. The bull slammed its head into Tom's skull. In an instant, Tom went limp, knocked out cold, but his hand was still tied tight. He didn't fall off. He couldn't. He was stuck. Woolly Bugger didn't stop. For 2 straight minutes, it bucked, stomped, and dragged Tom's unconscious body across the arena. His legs were trapped under the bull's weight. The crowd was frozen in horror. The beast stomped on him again and again. The only thing worse than the sound was the silence from Tom. He wasn't moving. Arena workers rushed in. They struggled to cut the rope while the bull thrashed. Every second felt like a lifetime. After 2 minutes, they freed him. Tom was carried out on a stretcher. His body was mangled, bruised from head to toe. At the hospital, doctors worked fast, but he didn't wake up. Not for 1 hour, not for 2. He stayed unconscious for 3 terrifying hours. No one knew if he'd wake up at all. When he finally opened his eyes, he had no idea what had happened. He had to be told that a 2,000-pound bull nearly killed him and that the bull had died 2 weeks later, possibly from the collision with Tom's head. But the worst part wasn't in the arena. It was in the stands. Nancy Oar, Tom's wife, was watching. She had seen hundreds of rides, but the second she saw Tom's body go limp, she knew something was wrong. She could only watch as her husband was dragged and crushed. 2 minutes of pure helplessness. She later said it was the most terrifying moment of her life. The crowd was in shock, but Nancy felt like she was watching her husband die in front of her. When he was taken away, she ran beside him, not knowing if she'd ever speak to him again. At the hospital, when Tom came to, reality hit hard. The injuries were bad. Concussion, bruising, trauma that wouldn't just fade. Doctors warned him. They said his body had changed. His mind too. But Tom wasn't ready to give up. He kept riding, kept chasing that rush, but something had changed. The thrill was fading. The rodeo, once a symbol of freedom, started to feel like a cage made of noise, danger, and routine. For more than 10 years, he pushed through. But inside, something was shifting. By 1981, Tom had spent 25 years riding bucking horses and 18 years riding bulls. That's over half his life. And then, just like that, he made the hardest decision of all. He walked away. This wasn't fear, it was clarity. He didn't want to keep proving himself in front of crowds. He wanted to test himself where no one was watching. So, he turned his back on the arena and looked toward the wild. Real danger, real survival. And that's when he and his wife Nancy found it, deep in the mountains of Montana. Their search wasn't random. Every summer, as they followed the rodeo circuit west, they felt drawn to the wild. One place kept calling them louder than the rest, the Yaak Valley. It wasn't just remote, it was nearly forgotten. Just 15 miles east of Idaho's edge and 4 miles from Canada, it sat in the middle of the vast Kootenai National Forest. The roads were barely there. The winters were 6 months long, and there were no emergency services. But that's what they wanted: isolation, silence, a true challenge. In 1981, they faced their first winter. It nearly broke them. The cold was beyond what they expected. But they stayed, they learned, and the land gave back. There was wildlife everywhere: deer, elk, even fur-bearing animals. Enough to hunt, enough to trap. It wasn't easy, but it was real, and that made all the difference. They built everything from scratch. Tom felled trees himself, peeled the bark, notched the logs, and stacked them into what would become their home. Then came the outbuildings, storage sheds, workshops, and spaces to process hides. Every single board and nail was put in by hand. There were no shortcuts, just hard work and patience. For water, they dug wells. For heat, they chopped wood. For light, they used oil lamps. Every winter, they had to be ready. Every system had to work, or they wouldn't make it. But it wasn't just about survival. It became something more. One day, Tom found a $3 booklet in a shop in Billings. Just 16 pages. But inside it was something ancient. Brain tanning, a method used by Native Americans for thousands of years. It turns out, every animal has just enough brain to tan its own hide. That's nature's perfect balance. Tom followed the guide step by step, scraping, soaking, stretching. It was hard work, but the result? Leather so soft, you could blow air through it. Breathable, strong, and unlike anything you could buy in stores. Soon, this wasn't just a skill. It was an art, and it didn't take long before others noticed. They started a small business. From deep in the mountains, they built the Willow Bend Trading Post. Tom's handmade leather goods, moccasins, buckskin shirts, knife sheaths, started selling fast. Reenactors, survivalists, and history buffs loved them. Each deer hide tanned with his method could sell for $100. Full buckskin outfits sold for even more. People called it the best in the game. Tom Oar wasn't just another man living in the mountains. In Montana, people started calling him the Professor of Primitive Living. Not in a joking way. This was serious respect. By 1995, his name was spreading through the entire Rocky Mountain region. The Smithsonian called him. So did National Geographic and several universities. They all wanted to learn from him. In 2001, the Montana Historical Society officially recorded his knowledge as part of a project called Living Heritage. That's how rare and valuable his skills were. People came from as far as Japan and Germany just to watch how he lived. In 2004, a BBC crew spent 3 months filming his daily routines. Even Native American tribes, including the Blackfoot Nation and the Crow tribe, gave him honorary recognition for keeping traditional skills alive. That's something they almost never do for outsiders. Since 1990, Tom had trained over 30 apprentices, but only 4 managed to finish his brutal 2-year program. To pass, they had to survive alone in the wild for 30 straight days, with nothing but primitive tools. Then, everything changed in 2012. It started with a simple conversation. A neighbor named Tim Linehan, who used to host a fishing show, mentioned Tom to an old camera guy he knew. That cameraman had started a new company called Warm Springs Productions. They were working with the History Channel to create a show called Mountain Men. No actors, just real people living off the grid. When Tim suggested Tom, the production team drove out to see him. They filmed just 1 day of Tom's life. That one day was enough. On May 31st, 2012, Mountain Men premiered. Tom, who was 69 at the time, became a TV star overnight, but he never acted. He didn't change. He just did what he always did: hunt, trap, tan hides, and survive in the harshest conditions nature could throw at him. Audiences were hooked. Tom didn't try to impress anyone. He didn't shout or show off. He just worked quietly, with a calm, patient focus that felt like it came from another time. Born in 1943, he had spent over 50 years in the wild. He knew how to tan hides using animal brains, a technique that went back centuries. He made bows, knives, and clothes from nothing but what he found in the woods. While most people raced through modern life, Tom moved slowly and with purpose. It wasn't just impressive, it was hypnotic. Fans loved how he stayed cool, even in life-threatening situations. He once handled an emergency more than 80 miles away from the nearest hospital, like it was just another day. He wasn't playing a role, that's just who he was. Unshaken, even when the winters dropped far below zero. The producers realized they had found something rare, a man who didn't perform for the camera. Tom just was, and that was enough. But fame came with a cost. At first, it was just a few letters in the mail. Maybe someone would recognize him at the feed store. But soon, it turned into something else entirely. By the time the show hit its peak, about 300 people were showing up at Tom and Nancy's remote cabin every summer. 300. That's despite the fact their home was buried deep in the Kootenai National Forest, 4 miles from the Canadian border and 15 miles from the Idaho line. No mobile signal, no GPS, just trees, dirt roads, and silence, until it wasn't. People didn't just want a photo. They wanted to stand next to him, to feel the life he lived. Fans described it like a kind of spiritual experience. For Tom and Nancy, it felt like their quiet life was slipping away. They couldn't go on morning walks without someone snapping a picture. They couldn't enjoy a quiet evening without hearing a knock on the door. Strangers wandered the woods with cameras, hoping to catch a glimpse of them working. And it wasn't just Americans. One couple came all the way from Switzerland on their honeymoon. Others flew in from Germany, England, and across the US. They brought gifts, cameras, and stories about how Tom had changed their lives. Some even told local shopkeepers, "We came to Montana just to find Tom Oar." That remote area, once silent and forgotten, became a map point for wilderness pilgrims. Small businesses noticed the surge. Tourists came year-round, even during snowstorms. Tom was kind about it. He smiled, thanked visitors, and shook hands. But the truth was clear. His sanctuary had become a tourist attraction. The quiet place he and Nancy had chosen for peace and privacy now buzzed with car engines and voices. Nature sounds were drowned out by the footsteps of fans. Tom never complained in anger, but he did speak honestly. Yes, he was grateful. Yes, he loved that people cared. But no, this was not what he wanted. The couple slowly began to step back from public appearances, not because they hated the attention, but because they missed their life, the life they built far away from everything. On April 26, 2015, Tom Oar got a phone call that tore his world apart. His daughter, Keely Oar, had died in St. Petersburg, Florida. She was just 49 years old. The date made it worse. She'd been born on Valentine's Day, February 14, 1966. She had died just 2 months after what should have been her 49th birthday. Tom was thousands of miles away when the call came in. He was deep in the Montana wilderness, living off the grid in the Yaak Valley. He didn't have easy access to phones or the internet. That isolation, which had once brought him peace, now became a wall between him and the most important moment of his life, the chance to be there for his daughter. What made it all even more painful was that Keely had been sick for a long time. Tom didn't share the details with the public. He kept it private, out of respect. But the fact that she had been battling illness quietly makes you wonder how much she went through alone. While Tom was living his rugged life in the woods, building tools by hand and surviving harsh winters, Keely was fighting her own battle, one he never fully saw. The silence around her illness speaks volumes. Tom, who openly talked about the challenges of mountain life, refused to speak about this one. That tells you how deep the pain runs. But Keely wasn't just someone's daughter. She had built a strong, independent life. She worked in medical sales, a tough and competitive field, and she made it work. She was also a woman of deep faith, a practicing Christian who leaned on her beliefs through the hardest times. She had moved to Florida in 1986 after living in Virginia, and she built a full life there. She had family who loved her, her mother Jan Fraser, her brothers Chad and Matt, her grandmother Mary Jane, and many cousins, including Sue and Jay Sewell. She also had a niece, a nephew, and a dog named Annie. Even though she lived far from Tom, her life was full of connection. Still, the distance hurt. While Keely was in Florida, possibly needing her father the most, Tom was 80 miles away from the nearest clinic. That's how far his home in Yaak Valley was from basic medical care. When you live that remote, even an emergency feels out of reach. And when the emergency was his daughter, the reality hit hard. Tom, the man who could survive anything in the wild, was powerless. The same lifestyle that made him respected and admired had also built a wall between him and his daughter's final days. The pain of that distance never really left him. After Keely's death, Tom didn't speak much. He didn't give interviews or post tributes. He just kept going, the way he always had. But people noticed the shift. The quiet became heavier. Behind the public image of the strong mountain man was a father grieving in silence. No survival trick could fix this. No handmade tool could bring her back. Then came his own nightmare. It happened on a freezing winter night in Montana. Tom Oar, the man who had spent over 40 years surviving in the wild without a single serious health problem, suddenly woke up gasping for air. He couldn't breathe. It wasn't just a cold or something simple. This time, he was choking on air, and the fear was written all over his face. For a man who had lived through blizzards, bears, and everything the mountain could throw at him, this moment was different. It was the first time he felt like he might not make it. Nancy, his wife for decades, saw the panic in his eyes, and when Tom said he needed help, she didn't waste a second. Tom never asked for help, not once, but now they had no choice. They jumped in the truck and began an 80-mile emergency drive through one of the harshest landscapes in North America. It was pitch dark, freezing cold, and every twist in the mountain road felt like a race against time. Their cabin was so far off the map, just 4 miles from the Canadian border and deep in the Kootenai National Forest, that medical help was practically a luxury. Nancy kept driving, hands shaking, headlights cutting through the snow. Tom kept gasping for air, every mile feeling like it might be his last. When they finally reached the clinic in Libby, Montana, doctors ran tests and gave them the news that changed everything. Tom's heart was failing. He was diagnosed with congestive heart failure, and fluid had already started filling his lungs, a condition called pulmonary edema. It explained why he couldn't breathe that night. The doctors said his heart wasn't pumping blood the way it should. All those years of surviving the wilderness had masked the symptoms. His body had been compensating until it couldn't anymore. Tom was 79. Until then, he'd chopped wood, hiked steep slopes, hunted his own food, no problem. Now, he needed heart meds just to keep going. He was fitted with a defibrillator vest. It could shock his heart back into rhythm if things went south. The vest wasn't just gear. It was a lifeline. It weighed 2 pounds, had sensors, and could deliver up to 5 shocks if his heart stopped. For someone who had never depended on modern tech, this was more than just a physical shift. It was a mental one, too. Tom was being forced to trust machines with his life, and yet he accepted it. In a quiet moment on camera, Tom said, "We're all gonna die sometime, so you might as well try to enjoy what you got left." It was honest, the kind of wisdom you only get from someone who's lived through everything and come out the other side. But even he couldn't hide the weight of what it meant. His body, the one tool he'd trusted all his life, was breaking down. And Nancy, she had to pick up the slack. Their entire life had changed. Now, every chore, every trip into the forest, every moment had a shadow of uncertainty hanging over it. But Tom's story wasn't just about a heart condition. 2 years before that scare, in 2020, something strange happened. A fake obituary appeared online, not a rumor. A full-blown, professionally written obituary with names, dates, and even fake family quotes. It said Tom was dead. Thousands believed it. Fans panicked. They started posting tributes, writing condolences, sharing their favorite mountain men memories. Facebook pages turned into digital memorials. People weren't trying to spread lies. They were mourning someone they truly admired. The problem? None of it was true. Tom was very much alive, but the damage was done. The obituary was too convincing. It used real details from Tom's past. His rodeo days, his move to the Yaak River Valley, his TV appearances. It blurred truth and fiction so well that it fooled almost everyone. And then, in 2024, the rumors came back again. This time, they said Tom had died in Lakeland, Florida, at the age of 81. Same story. No real source, no official statement, just vague details and emotional headlines. People believed it again, partly because of that past health scare. The story had just enough truth to feel real. Tom's family had to step in. On December 21st, 2024, his sister-in-law, Tom Oar, publicly confirmed he was alive. Not just alive. He had visited her that same day to pick up homemade popcorn balls. His snowmobile wasn't working, so he left on foot to check his traps. That wasn't the kind of story you could make up. It was real, down to the popcorn. The reason the lies kept spreading was simple: money. Content creators were using Tom's name to get clicks. Each false report brought views, shares, and ad revenue. Tom had become a tool for people chasing attention, regardless of the truth. It didn't help that he'd been showing up less and less on Mountain Men after season 9. Fans noticed. They asked questions. When they didn't get answers, they made up their own. Tom had never liked fame. In fact, in 2019, He said over 300 strangers had come to his cabin that summer alone. Some were honeymooners from Switzerland. He didn't want to be a tourist attraction, he just wanted his peace back. But the internet doesn't forget, and it doesn't wait for the truth. Even though he returned briefly for season 12 in 2023, people still weren't sure what to believe. His health had changed. His age was catching up, and his world, the wild, quiet, self-reliant life he'd built, was now tangled in social media noise. His family, his friends, and even the show's producers have been working behind the scenes to push back against the lies. But it's an uphill battle. The truth spreads slow. Lies move fast. And for someone like Tom Oar, who never wanted the spotlight in the first place, the spotlight has become the biggest threat of all. He's still standing, still breathing, but now every day is different. Every step forward feels like defiance, not just against illness, but against the age of misinformation, where the truth gets buried beneath likes, shares, and viral headlines.